The town clock struck noon, and every eye on Main Street turned toward the small white church at the edge of Willow Creek. Inside, beneath old wooden rafters and dusty stained-glass windows, Emily Carter stood alone at the altar. She wore a simple cream wedding dress, sewn by her aunt's careful hands, its fabric plain but clean. Her fingers trembled so badly that the small bouquet of wildflowers shook with them. Her groom was late. She lifted her eyes to the church doors again, hoping they would swing open at any second. She imagined a man rushing down the aisle, breathless and smiling, apologizing as he called her name. But the doors stayed closed. The only sound inside the church was the soft rustle of hymn book pages and the slow sigh of the preacher as he glanced at the clock and then away. Outside, a Texas summer pressed down hard on the town. Wagons rattled past, horses stamped and snorted. Somewhere nearby, a saloon piano played a cheerful tune that felt cruel against the heavy silence inside the church. Emily could feel the weight of every person sitting behind her. Their stares pressed into her back, filled with pity that burned worse than anger. In the front pew, her father, Thomas Carter, cleared his throat. He wore his only good jacket, the one that smelled faintly of smoke from branding season. His jaw was tight. He had sold 2 of their best milk cows to pay the marriage broker. The man had promised a good groom from back east, a serious man, a shopkeeper's son, someone who wanted a wife and a fresh start in Texas, someone who never came. Maybe his wagon broke a wheel, Aunt May whispered beside Thomas, her voice thin with hope. The roads through the pass are rough. The preacher shifted his feet. We can wait a little longer, he said gently. I am sure there is some explanation. Emily swallowed hard. That morning, she had fixed her hair herself in the small cracked mirror at the ranch house. She had twisted her golden hair neatly at the back of her head and smiled at her reflection. She had tried to imagine being someone's wife. Chosen through letters and promises written in careful ink, it was not a love story, but it was a way out, a way to save the ranch, a way to keep her father from losing everything. Now that morning smile felt stolen, like it belonged to another girl. Minutes passed, then more. The young boy at the organ stared at his hands. Old women whispered behind gloved fingers. 2 ranch hands stood near the door, hats in hand, unsure whether to stay or slip away. Then the clock struck again. Each sound felt like it counted another piece of her hope falling away. The preacher stepped closer. His voice stayed kind, but his eyes were tired. Miss Carter, it has been over an hour. We cannot keep everyone waiting much longer. Emily nodded. Her legs felt numb, but she forced her voice steady. I understand. Her father stood. His boots scraped the wooden floor. His face was red with heat, anger, and shame, but none of it was aimed at her. We should go home, Emily, he said quietly. There is work to be done. Her heart twisted. She had imagined walking out of this church with a husband at her side, smiling at the town, maybe shy but proud. Instead, she turned and walked alone down the aisle. Her dress whispered against the floor. The wildflowers drooped in her hands. No one spoke as she passed. That silence hurt more than any cruel word could have. Outside, the sunlight struck her face hard. She blinked. Her father placed a rough hand on her shoulder and guided her toward their wagon. She climbed up carefully, keeping her dress from catching, and stared straight ahead as he took the reins. The ride back to the Carter Ranch felt endless. Dry grass stretched on both sides of the road, yellow and brittle. Fence posts leaned like tired men. Thin cattle dotted the pasture, ribs clear beneath their hides. They needed rain. They needed money. They had neither. I am sorry, Pa, Emily said at last, her voice barely more than air. He tightened his grip on the reins. You have nothing to be sorry for. You showed up. That man is the fool, not you. But you sold the cows, she said. You trusted that broker. Thomas let out a slow breath. I did what I thought was right. A husband might have saved this place. But a man who cannot show his face on his wedding day is not worth a single hoof. When they reached the ranch house, Aunt May hurried out, her apron twisted in her hands. I put the cake away, she said softly. We can still cut it later if you want. Emily stepped down and looked at the house, the tired barn, the empty corral. Everything looked the same as it had that morning. But inside her, something had cracked. A quiet piece of trust had broken clean through. "I am going to change," Emily said. "This dress feels wrong now." In her small bedroom, she folded the wedding dress carefully and placed it at the foot of her bed. She pulled on a worn blue cotton dress instead, the one she worked in every day. The fabric scratched her skin, but it felt honest. She tied her hair back with a plain ribbon and looked at herself again. Not a bride, just Emily Carter. Days passed. Word spread through town faster than fire through dry grass. Some people were kind, some were not. Men laughed in the saloon. Women whispered in the street. The ranch did not care about gossip. It needed work. Emily rose before dawn. She helped her father mend fences, check cattle, and ride the far pasture. The sun burned her skin. Dust filled the lines of her hands. At night, she fell into bed aching and empty. Only when the house grew quiet did the memory return. The empty church, the closed doors. One evening, as the sun sank red over the land, Emily stood on the porch wiping her hands on a cloth when she heard it. Hooves, several of them. A wagon. Dust rose on the road. Someone was coming fast. Her father stepped beside her, frowning. "We are not expecting anyone." As the riders drew closer, Emily saw a tall man on a dark bay horse. He wore a clean white shirt and black vest. He sat easy in the saddle, steady and sure. The group slowed at the gate. The tall man dismounted in one smooth motion and tied his reins like a man used to being obeyed. "Afternoon," he said. "Thomas Carter." "That is me," her father answered. "Luke Randall," the man said, "owner of the Double R Ranch. I believe we have business to discuss." Emily's breath caught. The Double R was one of the largest ranches in the county, a place people spoke of with respect and a little fear. Luke Randall stepped into their house, carrying dust, silence, and something that felt like change. The kitchen felt smaller once Luke Randall sat at the table. His broad shoulders filled the chair, and his quiet presence pressed into every corner of the room. Emily stood near the stove, pretending to fuss with the kettle, though it had already boiled. Aunt May moved dishes that did not need moving. Thomas Carter stayed standing, arms crossed, as if sitting might give away ground he could not afford to lose. Luke wrapped his hands around the coffee cup, but did not drink. "I will speak plain," he said. "I heard what happened in town." The room went still. Thomas's jaw tightened. "Most folks heard," he said. "Most folks laughed." "Not me," Luke replied. "A man who breaks his word is worth very little. A woman who keeps hers, even when it costs her, is worth a great deal." Emily felt heat rise in her face, but kept her eyes down. Thomas snorted softly. "Fine words, but I doubt you rode all this way just to offer comfort." Luke nodded once. "You are right. I am short on something." Thomas frowned. "Cattle is not it. You have more than anyone." "Hands," Luke said. "Good ones. A ranch lives or dies by people who show up and do the work."
His eyes shifted to Emily.
For a moment, he studied her like he studied land or stock, not judging beauty but strength. Thomas followed his gaze. "My daughter works hard," Thomas said slowly. "But she belongs here."
"I know," Luke said.
"That is why I am offering her a job. I need a housekeeper. Someone who knows ranch life. Someone strong. Someone I can trust." Aunt May's eyes widened. "At the Double R?" Luke nodded. "Fair pay. A room of her own. Food and respect." Silence filled the kitchen. Emily turned from the stove. "Why me?" she asked. "Because you feel sorry for me?" "No," Luke said at once. "I do not hire out of pity. I watched you in that church. You stood longer than most men would have. Then you went home and worked. That tells me what I need to know." Thomas shifted uneasily. "We need her here." Luke's voice softened. "You are running out of rope, Carter. Drought does not care about pride." He reached into his vest and laid a folded paper on the table. "I want to buy your ranch. The words hit Emily hard. Buy our ranch. Her chest tightened. This land held every memory she had of her mother, every hard season, every small joy. Thomas stared at the paper. This land has been in my family for years, and it has been worked hard, Luke said. But the bank will take it soon enough. I am offering you a way out with dignity. Emily shook her head. So the job comes with the land. I am not something to be traded. Luke met her eyes. The land deal stands whether you take the job or not. The work is your choice. Thomas picked up the paper with shaking hands. His breath caught when he saw the number. Aunt May covered her mouth. Luke stood. I will give you 2 days. After he left, the house felt hollow. That night, the lamp burned late as they talked in low voices. Aunt May spoke of winters and coughs she heard through thin walls. Thomas spoke of debt and fear. Emily listened, torn between love for the land and love for her father. By morning, her choice was made. 2 days later, she stood in the hotel lobby with her father. Luke looked up from his ledger as they entered. Thomas handed over the signed paper. Take care of it. Luke nodded. I will. Emily faced him. I will take the job, she said. But I will earn my keep. Luke's mouth curved slightly. I would expect nothing less. Life at the Double R moved fast and hard. The house was large and quiet, with long halls and tall windows. Emily learned its rhythm quickly. She rose before dawn, cooked for the men, kept the house running smooth. Luke spoke little, but he watched everything. Winter came early that year. One night, a storm tore at the land. When the north barn roof began to lift, Emily followed Luke into the wind despite his orders. They fought the storm side by side. When it was over, snow clung to her hair and lashes. Luke looked at her with something new in his eyes. You do not scare easy, he said. Neither do you, she answered. From that night on, the space between them slowly closed. He asked her opinion. He listened. The house no longer felt empty. One evening, as the sun bled gold over the fields, Luke spoke quietly. You waited for a man once. She nodded. I am not him, he said. I show up. Her heart beat hard as he took her hands. Emily, will you marry me? The answer came with tears and a steady smile. Yes. This time, when she walked down the aisle, the man waiting had been there long before the clock struck noon. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and soft, as if the land itself had decided to be kind for once. A light breeze moved through the cottonwoods along Willow Creek, carrying the smell of dust and grass and fresh coffee from the kitchens around town. The small white church stood exactly as it always had, paint chipped, steps worn smooth by years of boots and hope. But this time, there was no heavy silence hanging over it. There was laughter. There were voices. There was waiting that felt full instead of empty. Emily stood in the small room behind the church, her hands folded in her lap. She wore a new cream dress, simple and clean. Nothing fancy, but it fit her like it belonged to her life now. Aunt May moved around her, smoothing fabric that did not need smoothing, her eyes bright and wet all at once. You look strong, Aunt May said softly. Not just pretty, strong. Emily smiled. I feel strong. Outside, the sound of boots on wood and low voices drifted in through the open window. Luke had arrived early. He had arrived so early that the preacher joked he might wear a path into the floor. He stood at the front of the church now, hat in his hands, eyes fixed on the door like nothing in the world could pull them away. Thomas Carter sat in the front pew, his back straight, his hands resting on his knees. He wore a clean shirt and his old jacket, but his face looked lighter than it had in years. Since selling the ranch, his cough had eased, his sleep had grown deeper. Working as a hired hand suited him better than carrying the weight of ownership ever had. When the music began, Emily rose. Her heart beat steady, not racing, not afraid. As she stepped into the aisle, sunlight spilled through the windows, warming her face. She walked forward with her head high. This time the eyes on her were not filled with pity. They were filled with joy. Luke watched her approach, his expression open and honest. No nerves hid behind pride. No doubt sat in his eyes, only certainty. When she reached him, he leaned close enough to speak without being heard. "I told you," he murmured. "I show up." She smiled, her eyes shining. "And I told you I would never wait for an empty promise again." The ceremony was simple, words spoken plain, vows made without flourish but heavy with meaning. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the church filled with sound, applause, cheers, even laughter. When they stepped outside together, the sunlight wrapped around them like a blessing. At the small gathering afterward, there was food and music and stories. Ranch hands from the Double R stood beside townsfolk who once whispered. Aunt May laughed until she cried. Thomas shook Luke's hand hard, then pulled him into a rough embrace that said more than words ever could. That evening, when the crowd thinned and the light faded, Emily and Luke rode out together toward the ranch that was now their shared home. The land rolled wide and open before them. The cattle were settled. The fences stood firm. For the first time in years, the future did not feel like something to fear. Married life did not soften Luke Randall, but it deepened him. He still rose before dawn. He still worked until his hands ached. But now he came home to a house that breathed with life. Emily did not stop working either. She ran the home with the same care she once gave her father's ranch. She knew every corner of the house, every habit of the men, every quiet need that went unspoken. They learned each other slowly. Luke learned that Emily liked her coffee strong and her mornings quiet. Emily learned that Luke counted fence posts when he worried and checked the locks twice when storms rolled in. They did not rush love. They built it the same way they built everything else. Day by day, honest and solid. Gossip faded. People found new stories to tell. What stayed was respect. The Double R thrived. Cattle prices turned. Rain came at last, soaking the land deep. Thomas worked lighter days, smiling more than he ever had. Aunt May took to visiting often, claiming the house was too big not to be filled. One evening, months later, Emily stood on the porch, watching the sunset bleed gold and red across the fields. Luke joined her, resting his arms on the railing. "Do you ever think about that day?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "Sometimes. Does it still hurt?" She thought for a moment. "No. It reminds me where I learned not to settle." He reached for her hand. "I am glad you did not." She leaned into him, feeling the steady strength she had come to trust. The land stretched wide before them, no longer something to be survived, but something to be lived on together. Emily Carter had once stood alone at an altar, waiting for a man who never came. Now, she stood beside a husband who showed up every day, not just in words but in action, and the life they built together was stronger for every hard season that came before it.